Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's time for another dispatch. And I did say, excuse me, I did say that I'm gonna read from my new book, and I will, but probably next week. I think I'd like to one more section from Andrew Forge's essay on Matisse and Portraiture. This section is so good. I, the essay goes further, but we'll just stop with this next section. It's just wonderful. So we'll do that, and then plan is next week, this book, Power and Presence, a handbook for painting in our time. And I'll read something from it. Anyway, we are here in Colorado, I am, and it got cloudy and it's going to rain. It was not cloudy before. It was sunny. Yeah, Colorado. Okay, we have coffee. We're good. Uh, I am right. I'll just start with the last. Yes, sound is on. Okay. The last sentence of that last section. Well, maybe the last couple. Finally, I show you the portrait of Pellerin, where the symmetrical pose confronts us with intimidating severity. The dome of his bald head occludes the frame of the picture behind him. The two, sitter and picture, are bound together by a apparently arbitrary arc of paint. The two stare back at us. Pellerin was a rich industrialist. He was also the owner of the largest collection in France of Matisse's ultimate master, Cézanne. Okay, next section. Expression. How can this affinity between picture and face be brought to bear on the matter that I started with, the sense of living likeness that haunts Matisse's portraits? Picture and face, right? That was a picture like a face. I turn first to his own words. Painters' statements usually need to be taken with a grain of salt, but Matisse's Notes of a Painter of 1908 are different. He was 39 when he wrote them. He was confident of the ground he had covered in the last 10 years. He had just opened a school. He really wanted to explain, to make himself clear. These are carefully formulated statements written with integrity. What I am after, above all, is expression. This is the quote. What I am after above all is expression. The thought of a painter must not be considered as separate from his pictorial means. I am unable to distinguish between the feeling I have about life and my way of translating it. Thought, feeling, means of translation, pictorial means, expression, they all are one thing here. It is not a thought that I'm now going to try to execute in paint. It becomes the way I'm painting. What I am after above all is expression. The thought of a painter must not be considered as separate from his pictorial means. I am unable to distinguish between the feeling I have about life and my way of translating it. That's it right there. Whole kit and caboodle. He asserts, this is Forge going on, he asserts the identity, the inextricable link between ends and means. You could say product and process. We talk a lot about, not getting caught up in the product. You want to pay attention to your process, but they really go together. They're inextricable. This is where he dissociates himself once and for all from the academic tradition. right? Because the academic tradition, you've got, you know, all the process is for the sake of the end. It's a different deal. It's a different attitude. There's more of an emphasis here on process. Now he goes on to specify how this identity can be brought about. And here's a quote again. Expression, for me, does not reside in the passions glowing in a human face or manifested by violent movement. The entire arrangement of my picture is expressive. The entire arrangement of my picture is expressive. The place occupied by the figures, the empty spaces around them, the proportions. In a picture, every part will be visible and will play its appointed role. Everything that is not useful in the picture is, it follows, harmful. A work of art must be harmonious in its entirety, integrated, all of it, everything that's showing up, one thing. You will notice how he presents the two key ideas. This is Forge again. You will notice how he presents the two key ideas, expression and wholeness, as though they are linked, or rather, different ways of looking at the same thing, the recto and verso of the same coin. Wholeness. Expression is a strange word. It means first to press or squeeze out, only later to represent, to state, to convey. In this sense, it seems to point both ways, inwards and outwards, to hover somewhere in that shadowy zone between subject and object. Oh, he's so good. We sweat over how to express ourselves. We sweat over how to interpret another's expression. Getting it right. The inside and the outside, that they are coherent, that they are, that they, I don't have that language right now. When Matisse begins to draw his model, her expression is, if you like, what her features mean, how she represents herself. Understanding the constellation of her features is to understand her expression. But his search for that constellation consists exactly of his search for expression, Matisse's expression. I think no artist has ever understood this reciprocity as clearly as he did. The sitter's face was a mirror, not in the vulgar sense that could be applied to all those portrait painters who always end up painting the same face. With him, the particular, the idiosyncratic, and elusive was the sharpest stimulus to his own expression. Expression, he tells us, is indistinguishable from his means. What does this signify? It does not mean that he has some sort of held idea about what he wants the drawing or painting to express, and then shapes and judges the painting as the vehicle for that idea. Sounds familiar, huh? He looks to the painting to guide his expression, to make himself clear to himself. His moment-to-moment response to how the canvas looks back at him constitutes the unfolding of his expression. This is brilliant. Totally right on. His moment-to-moment response of how the canvas looks back at him constitutes the unfolding of his expression. Now, he describes the painting process. He's talking in general here, not about portraits. I must precisely define the character of the object, or of the body that I wish to paint. To do so, I study my method closely. If I put a black dot on a sheet of white paper, the dot will be visible no matter how far away I hold it. It is a clear notation. But beside this dot, I place another one, and then a third, and already there is confusion. In order for the first dot to maintain its value, I must enlarge it as I put other marks on the paper. His marks must hold their own, must stand, this is back to Forge. His marks must hold their own, must stand on their own terms. The relations between them, their organization, must have their own coherence, and in the achievement of that coherence, he discovers his expression. I want to say, also just parenthetically here for me, and I talk about this in the painting journey and it's in the book, and you can hear me, there's a thing, a recording somewhere online, right? When we're developing our skills and we're learning how to, get proportion and draw what we see and find the tones of what we see and mix color and all that, great. Those are really important skill sets. Those are different, and the challenges are different than what he is now doing. He's got his skills and he's looking now to discover his means of expression. And that occurs through this process now that Andrew Forge is describing. An understanding in the way that he's unpacking Matisse's essay. But that's where that's where the mystery is. That's where the discovery, the joy, the difficulty, really, but the wonder, all of it. Okay. His marks must hold their own, must stand on their own terms. The relations between them, their organization, must have their own coherence. And in the achievement of that coherence, he discovers his expression. So I'm trying to figure out how to get this image, this painting, drawing to work in its own terms. And then it turns out, oh, that's my expression, but it's in its own terms. And it turns out that its terms are my terms. But I discover that through the doing, trying to make sense of this thing. Okay. What is assumed here, it goes without saying, is the vitality of the canvas or the sheet in front of him. It looks back. And the fantasy that absorbs him is that as he marks it, the canvas or paper, he is modulating its expression. So I'm working, and this thing is looking back at me. It's vital. It's not nothing. It's looking back at me. At a certain point, it starts to take on its own life, its own expression. Look, for example, at one of the few portrait drawings done in the Fauvist years, the portrait of Jean Manguin of 1906. The drawing develops symmetrically. The I've got the next one he mentioned. No, I don't have this one. Okay. The portrait of Jean Manguin of 1906. The drawing develops symmetrically. The linked hands, the fold of her shawl, the centered brooch, the collar, all join in a series of upward spreading triangles that support her head. This structure spreads out from a vertical axis, the axis which supports her features, and is closed only by the swoop of the brim of her hat that literally caps it off. The whole drawing looks back at us. The marks that denote her eyes, nose, mouth are in lively accord with the marks that denote her shawl, the veil, lacy cuffs. I'll look for it. Maybe I can find this image. Maybe I did. The canvas or the sheet of paper has its own specifics of size, proportion, and area. It's not just a piece of something neutral. It is a whole thing. He devotes a paragraph to this point in The Notes of a Painter. If I take a sheet of paper of a given size, my drawing will have a necessary relationship to its format. I would not repeat this drawing on another sheet of different proportions, for example, rectangular instead of square. Nor should I be satisfied with a mere enlargement had I to transfer the sheet to a drawing, to transfer the drawing to a sheet, the same shape, but 10 times larger. Okay, end of his quote. Forage. At the height of his most severely modernist period, 1915, Matisse made some drawings of the violinist Eva Mudoci. That I have an image of, the one that's in MoMA. One of these is on a tall, narrow sheet. I think it is a Japanese paper that he used for prints. The image is worked out to the edge. You can see from the erased marks how he has progressively assimilated the image to the page, bringing the collar and the long upraised hand into a parallel relation to the edges, redrawing the features so that they lock into the shape of the paper. The paper that he pushes back on either side of the head with charcoal rubbing that is not so much like shading as like a kind of cutting or carving, as though the paper were a plank, something solid. In the famous drawing of the same sitter in MoMA, this one I have, I'll put in the email. We can see the same process working in an opposite direction. The drawing started at about two-thirds of its present size. The head was further to the right and much more naturalistic in its rendering. The additions appeared to be sequential. First, the strip on the left, making the whole wider than it is tall, allowing him to develop the great buttress of her supporting arm. Then the two strips on the bottom, which restore the proportions of the original sheet but change the subject, introducing the arm of the chair and the movement of the other arm across her lap. I can't think of another work that brings the experience of time more poignantly into play. There is a forward momentum, a drive in which one view of the whole is supplanted by another and another. At each stage, the parts root themselves in the different rectangles, giving a distinct quality to her presence, a different balance to her splendid pose. We take in this forward momentum by reading it backward, working back to the original drawing as though working through layers of memory. We find her present head locked in at the top of the page, the contour of the hair left open on both sides so that the background shapes flow in, as if to an armature to enclose and delicately support the head. Earlier markings have left their traces. Through them, we can feel her gradual shift to the left, drawing herself together, drawing herself up with greater and greater authority, and pulling away from, although not leaving, the ravishingly beautiful face that once was and is now erased, that hangs there, a memory. But it was in that veiled, dreaming face that the drawing began. Somewhere within those first moves were the seeds of the impulses that drove the drawing forward to its present state. Somewhere within those first moves were the seeds of the impulses that drove the drawing forward to its present state. In drawings like this, we can feel how sometimes the paper becomes so real in its dimensions that he is able to work on it as concretely as a sculptor working on a piece of stone. It is given, and the image is carved out of what is there as best it may be. His erasures are like a stripping down. There are several reported remarks where Matisse says things like, drawing is nearer to sculpture than to painting. Elderfield quotes him as saying, a drawing is a sculpture. And of course, at the end, with the cutouts, when he felt that he had at last got somewhere in his lifelong battle to have drawing and color speaking as one. Drawing and color speaking as one. He says it again in triumph. Cutting directly into color reminds me of a sculptor's carving into stone. there's a little bit left, a couple paragraphs, but I just want to say, all right, to understand, there's something very real about drawing and painting as a means of exploring what does it mean for me to to be alive, to be human. As I try to figure out what's my means of expression. What do I do with color? What do I do with line? What do I do with edge? How am I responding? All of that. It's so much more than just making a picture. All right. I mean, it is, of course, making some kind of image. And when it works and it's coherent, it's powerful. That's a powerful image. All right, onward. Couple paragraphs. There is a little self-portrait drawing where we have no choice but to see the sheet itself as the artist's head. The boundaries of the head are left open. I don't know where this is. I haven't seen it. The drawing is all features, but they don't float around. I'm reminded of a solid object that has had a face inscribed on it and becomes a head. And also of that astonishing object, the fifth version of the head of Janine, in which the features, the massive nose, the craggy eyes, have become a head, finding their own version of the skull, a more compelling presence by far than the earlier versions where the head was realized in a more normative form. I think it's the Norton Simon, or is it MoMA? Maybe it's MoMA? Maybe it's MoMA. There's a sequence you see, and it's over many, many years. He does those sculptures of his wife, and their change. Yeah. All right. In the painting of Sarah Stein, which is associated with the drawing that I first showed you, the head emerges from a gray wedge that is both background to her head and pushes forward to become her shoulders and chest in one continuous plane. The head and long neck seem to grow out of that gray plane, to be both part of it and an exotic flowering above its surface. The picture as rectangle, the picture as fabric, the picture as face, the haunting affinity between the face and the fabric that supports that supports it evokes the legendary go back blah, blah, blah. The haunting affinity between the face and the fabric that supports it evokes the legendary picture, the true image, the Vera icon, the Veronica, the veil onto which Christ's features were miraculously imprinted on the road to Calvary. I have no idea how much Matisse had thought about this legend before he made the Stations of the Cross designs for the chapel at Vence. But there the Veronica is, dominating the whole wall, facing us more openly than the figure on the cross and with greater force than anything else, because it is a picture. All right, there's more to that essay. Get the book. If you don't have this book, get this book. Observation Notation, Selected Writings of Andrew Forge. That's it. A little long. I wanted to finish that section. Okay, time to go make stuff. Hope you're well, and see you next week.